Hello, my name is Jesse Hirsh. I'd like to talk to you today about the power of digitization and the role that technology can play on your farm. And that role really begins with the power of information, in particular the power of data, and the idea that maybe the data that you're currently generating on your land, with your animals, with your equipment, is a new kind of cash crop that you can be harvesting and storing and then maybe even selling for tremendous value. But perhaps all this starts with the larger question of, do you have a digital barn? I mean, maybe you have a barn for your animals, maybe you have a drive shed for your equipment, but what about your information? What about your digital tools? What kind of facility or capacity do you have to take care of it, to protect it, to keep it secure and ensure that it can age over time? That's a really important thing for a farmer to consider. What kind of capacity, what kind of facilities, what kind of tools do you need now that we're rushing headfirst into the digital era and our farming operations are generating all sorts of data that it's in our interest to save. It's in our interest to think about long term. But maybe before we even ask the question of, do you have a digital barn, maybe we should be asking the question of, do you have reliable internet? Because unfortunately, a lot of farmers, the answer is no. Maybe they're stuck with satellite internet. Maybe they've got some form of unreliable wireless internet. When, honestly, the only internet you should have, that you should aspire to, is fiber optic. Because fiber optic connectivity is not only future-proof, but it will accommodate a lot of the agricultural applications that technology is going to enable that requires a lot of connectivity. That requires, quite frankly, a lot of data. And so that's where there's some interesting case examples around the world of farmers working together to take control of their own connectivity, really ensure that they get the best internet access they can. One of which is Griefy.net, which is based in Catalonia in eastern Spain. And there again, farmers who have banded together to create their own basically internet cooperative that guarantees that the farmers in that region have the highest speeds possible. Another example is Barn, or B4RN, broadband for the rural north, and it's based in northern England. And again, it's farmers who just started to run fiber optic cable through their fields and in their areas and region to ensure that they weren't left behind, to ensure that they had the right infrastructure to make sure that their farming practices, that their agricultural operations could be as profitable as possible by leveraging technology and leveraging information. Now, for myself, I'm a farmer in eastern Ontario in Lanark County, and I had to work with my friend's community fiber, as originally we had satellite internet, which was pretty much impossible to use. But when about the pandemic came about, we were lucky enough to work with community fiber to upgrade our own connectivity as well as our neighbors. And so there's all sorts of solutions that really provide a prerequisite, a kind of infrastructure to the power of digitization, which is recognizing the value of connectivity in the first place. But if you were to, say, decide you wanted to construct a digital barn, well, a lot of people would tell you, hey, build that barn in the cloud. Maybe you don't have the expertise to secure your data or to construct the necessary server infrastructure. And so cloud computing is...
What are you doing using your big school words? Just use normal people words and I'll understand what you're talking about.
Okay, that's fair, Ricky. When we say cloud computing, really what we mean is network computing. Having somebody else store your information and take care of your information, which is possible if you have a high-speed internet connection. If your farm is connected to the internet at incredible speeds, then yes, you can use cloud computing. But if, like me, originally you had terrible internet, well, that's where the concept of edge cloud comes into play. And edge cloud computing is the same potential, the same offering as cloud computing, but it's on your farm. It's on your premises. And that's where, instead of building your digital barn in the cloud, you might be building your digital barn in your drive shed, in your workshop, maybe in your basement. And that's where edge cloud technology makes that possible. So I offer this perhaps as a stopgap for those of you who may have terrible internet, that when you hear people talking about cloud technology, that's where edge cloud technology can allow for localization, can allow you to run servers and a network on your facility without then having to worry about those connectivity issues. Because for many farmers, the first application that they're going to have of collecting data or of using the internet, well, that's surveillance. I mean, here is a live picture, at least live when I'm recording this, of my goats. In this case, of our goat kids, which we isolate overnight from their parents. So the first thing we did was extending internet across our property was to install surveillance, was to install video cameras. Part of this was so that we could watch our animals without being present. We found that our animals act differently when humans aren't around. But it also allows us to multitask so that we can do many things and keep an eye on our property, keep an eye on our different stalls. In this case, as you can see, we've got one of our calves sleeping with our kids because we like to foster interspecies relationships and friendships. But there's a power to surveillance when it comes to really making the most of your facilities. And when we first installed our video cameras, we had terrible internet connectivity. And that's where you have to think about these issues. Because, for example, if we had gone with Google Nest, or if we had gone with a lot of other, perhaps cheaper video surveillance platforms, they all assume that you have high-speed connectivity. They all assume that you're uploading all of your data into the cloud, and that wasn't an option for us. So we had to install a system that ran everything locally. But the benefits were tremendous, both in terms of allowing us to do more with less, but also potentially creating a public audience and using those cameras to allow people from around the world to participate in your operations, to make friends with your animals and help build your brand and help build the value behind your brand. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But when I talk about surveillance as one of the essential elements of the power of digitization, it doesn't just include video surveillance. It can also include soil surveillance. You know, here's an example of some fairly cheap and accessible technology from India that's basically a manual soil sensing kit that allows a human being to walk around your fields, stick this technology into the ground, and start collecting data about your soil. And not just, say, moisture data, but the composition, the nutrients, the soil health overall, and that use that information to figure out strategies, to share that with your agronomist, to share that with the other partners who help with your operations. And this is just one example of something that's cheap and manual. But increasingly, there's automated solutions. I mean, this is TerraSentia, which is a company that's produced this robot, EarthSense. That is a data collection robot, a little robot that can crawl through your fields, both being able to analyze the soil as well as analyze the crops. In this case, going in a cornfield and getting below canopy information, as well as potentially having extensions that allow you to do above canopy. So this is why digitization of having a digital barn makes sense, because increasingly there's a lot of technology, a lot of tools that will dramatically expand your ability to collect data. You know, this is another project called ROMI, or Robots for Microfarms, that I'm interested in because I'm a relatively modest or small micro farmer. And this is another example of an open source device that can crawl through your fields and collect data. Now, this is still only a data collection device. They do intend to expand it to include the ability to seed, the ability to spray, the ability potentially even to harvest. But it speaks to these prerequisites of gathering data that then enables more advanced applications. You know, this is another organization called Twisted Fields. They're a farm in California building another free and open source robot. These are robots that you could build yourself and use to gather data about your crops and eventually about your animals, your livestock as well. All of these are projects that they are pursuing in a community context, in a cooperative context, so that other farmers might collaborate on improving and developing them. but they're really part of a larger field of agricultural robotics. DJI, the Chinese drone manufacturer, they've been investing in agricultural drones that on the one hand are designed to gather data, but these are examples of spraying drones that are able to apply pesticides and herbicides in a much more nuanced and surgical manner. So here you can see the example of data enabling precision agriculture, of allowing our equipment, allowing our operations to be as nimble and precise as possible because of the data that's being collected and because of the granular understanding that we can have about our crops, about our livestock, and ensure that we're as efficient as possible while maximizing our yields and therefore maximizing our margins and our profit. Now, it doesn't just apply, of course, to animals and crops. It applies to equipment. It applies to buildings, right? Increasingly, we're seeing grain silo sensors and systems that can offer preventative maintenance, that can recognize the early signs of rot, the early signs of mold or of pests, and allow you to intervene. Similar technology is now being applied to equipment so that you can gauge in preventative maintenance, be able to replace parts before they break down, ensure that you're changing fluids and greasing your machines, on regular basis so that you don't have breakdowns, especially when you need them, whether in harvest or whether in planting. And this is the real potential, not just of the data, but of the systems that data enable. Now, a larger question is, what do you do with all this data? I mean, on the one hand, you've got your digital barn, but you're still going to need software to store and protect it all. One example that I often share with my clients is FarmOS. FarmOS, or Farm Operating System, is a free and open source suite that makes it easy for farmers to not only manage their data, but keep track of ever expanding operations. Because while automation does address the labor shortage that farmers are always wrestling with, it doesn't eliminate labor, rather it expands capacity. It allows you to do more with less, and that's where you need software programs to kind of keep track of it all, to keep track of what you're doing to each field, how you're managing each crop, and how your technology and information is really enabling you to expand your operations, to do more and to be more responsive. And so it's creating a new kind of value chain, a new kind of ag tech ecosystem in which you have all sorts of different suppliers, as seen there on the right, who are all partnering or engaging with the information that's being generated by farmers, who are then leveraging this information, leveraging technology to maximize yields, to make more money, to be a better farmer, and to be a better business person when it comes to running your operations. But at the same time, there's a consequence to this. I mean, on the one hand, we're enabling greater traceability, so it's easier for buyers to understand exactly what went into producing those crops or producing that livestock. It's also changing the world of contract farming, because now a contract farmer has much more clear demands or clear expectations coming from the people who are hiring them. And it's changing the nature of compliance as we know it, because it's introducing greater transparency. It's introducing a greater scrutiny, not just over the farming practices, but the entire supply chain. And that is a flip side, because it means that you can't just farm however you want, but there may be external pressures. There may be external expectations in terms of how you carry out your business practices. Now, here's an example of a British company, small robot company, that I think illustrate this, because they're part of a growing wave of non-chemical weeding technology. These are largely coming out of Europe, where there is a greater demand for organic produce and a greater demand for farming practices that are seen as being tied to what consumers want to pay for. So this is a technology that uses both information and data, but in this case, either lasers or blades, to basically have the robot manually remove the weeds, even though it's an automated process. So it's non-chemical weed removal, and it's I kind of feel that the word organic is a little problematic, a little vague. So I think this is not necessarily organic, but a new class of farming enabled by technology, driven by transparency, that I suspect, like organic produce, will command a premium in the marketplace, but it will also create pressure on farming practices in general to change, because consumers and buyers will start to recognize, will develop a literacy that technology makes chemical-free farming possible, whatever that might mean. And that's going to have a huge impact on not just the public's perception of where their food comes from, but the demand for this type of technology. In this case, using lasers to kill the weeds on the ground and have that type of surgical precision when it comes to changing the way people farm. Obviously, this benefits the small robot company because they're the ones pushing this technology forward, but it gives you a glimpse as to how information, how digitization may change farming practices because of the technology that will then be available, both in terms of the precision, but in this case, foregoing herbicides, foregoing pesticides in terms of trying to create a more natural way of growing stuff, even though these machines obviously are the opposite of natural. But it presents a vision of the future that I think is different. And, that's where I want to emphasize the importance that digitization is not just robots. Digitization is not just automation. There's a human side to this, and that's the marketing, that's social media. This obviously merits a whole other presentation and conversation, but I wanted to highlight one of my neighbors, my source currently of beef, which is Corad Farms, and the importance of digitization really when it comes to marketing and it comes to giving a value add of if you have video cameras, making them available on Twitch. If you're collecting information about your cows, if you're demonstrating your farming practices, using social media as being able to charge a premium, as being able to develop an intimate relationship between you and your customers. And I think that is something that we have to include when we talk about the power of digitization, because it includes the power of social media, which is digital media, and the power of using the information that you collect from your farm, of using the information that you collect as part of your agricultural practices, and using that as a window to the world, using that as a way to connect with the public, to connect with your buyers, with your constituents, as a way of fostering community. Now, interestingly enough, the goats that you saw earlier, and I'll bring them up on the screen just for a moment, we actually live streamed their birth. So when these 4 kids were born earlier this spring, late winter, we live streamed it on the internet, both because we thought it would be entertaining and fantastic, but also because it provides a bond with our community members, with our prospective community members. It didn't take any extra effort for us because the cameras were all installed, but nonetheless created this compelling drama for our friends, our audience members to connect with. And that's one of the reasons why we talk about the power of digitization as not being just an issue of, say, marketing or just an issue of bragging about your practices, but a way of really connecting with the marketplace as a whole. And that's why we can't forget that the power of digitization isn't just about harvesting the information from your land, from your animals, from your equipment, because it is a cash crop that is increasing in value, but also because the power of digitization is to make our jobs easier, to give us more time to do the aspects of farming that we love, but also to share all of this information with our buyers, with our partners, with our suppliers, but also with the public, with the people who eat our food, with the people who support our business, because that's how we really leverage the power of digitization to help our business and to help our livelihood. So I hope that this has helped you. I hope that this has sparked you, if not to get on the learning curve that is digitization, or if you're already there, to move forward. Now, if you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. By all means, if you want to object, if you want to share a story or anecdote, please. This is how I learn. And this is how, as farmers, we connect with each other and find a way to really leverage this technology collaboratively so we can make the most while also supporting a successful and expanding business and industry. Thank you very much.